In the heart of a small suburban town where life seemed to follow a rhythm of quiet routines, the shocking and violent death of Lauren Rodriguez shattered the illusion of peace. Lauren, a 30-year-old mother of three, was well known in her community. A devoted parent, she worked long hours to provide for her family while balancing the demands of motherhood. Those who knew her described Lauren as kind-hearted but burdened by a personal life that recently taken a darker turn. Brianna Taylor, 27, was one of Lauren's co-workers. They worked together at a local retail store, where tension had been brewing between them for months. At first glance, their differences seemed superficial. Brianna was younger, tougher, and more headstrong. Lauren, on the other hand, carried herself with a quiet dignity. The tension between the two women, however, ran deeper than mere personality clashes. At the center of this growing animosity was a man named Mark Martinez. Mark, 35, was the brother of Selena Martinez, a 17-year-old who was often seen hanging around Brianna and looking up to her as a mentor. Mark had once dated Brianna, but after their breakup, rumors swirled that he had grown close to Lauren. This connection, whether real or exaggerated by gossip, would soon spiral into a series of decisions that would change the lives of everyone involved. Brianna had felt betrayed. As her relationship with Mark unraveled, her jealousy morphed into rage when she discovered Lauren had been spending time with him. To Brianna, this wasn't just a betrayal of friendship, it was a personal attack on her self-worth. And so a plan began to form, a plan that would lead to violence and ultimately death. On the surface, Lauren remained oblivious to just how deeply Brianna's anger ran. She had no idea that Brianna's quiet seething had turned into an obsession. Selena, still a teenager, was drawn into the plot, manipulated by Brianna's influence, and convinced that what they were about to do was justified. In the days leading up to the attack, Brianna instructed Selena to steal Layden's phone. This theft, Brianna thought, would reveal the full extent of Lauren's relationship with Mark. But in truth, it was only the beginning of a much darker scheme. The tension between Brianna and Lauren grew, hidden behind the monotony of their everyday lives, and no one could have predicted the violence that was about to unfold, an act that would forever scar this seemingly quiet town. The day of the attack started like any other, but for Brianna Taylor, it was the culmination of weeks of brooding over her supposed betrayal. She had already convinced Selena to be her accomplice in this plan, promising the young girl that they would set everything right by exposing Lauren's secrets. What Selena didn't fully understand was that Brianna had something far more sinister in mind. Under Brianna's guidance, Selena had stolen Lauren's phone the day before, hoping to uncover any text messages or evidence that would confirm her brother's affair. But when the stolen phone didn't reveal much, Brianna grew even more enraged. Her paranoia and jealousy were blinding her to reason. It was no longer about exposing the affair, it was about revenge. On the morning of the attack, Brianna lured Lauren to an apartment under false pretenses, pretending to be Selena. She sent a series of text messages from Selena's phone, asking Lauren to meet her for a conversation to clear the air. Unaware of the danger she was walking into, Lauren agreed, hoping to settle the conflict that had been simmering between them. When Lauren arrived, Brianna was already waiting. There were no friendly greetings, no gestures of goodwill. As soon as the door closed behind Lauren, the attack began. Brianna's pent-up fury exploded in a savage onslaught, and she assaulted Lauren with a violence that left her helpless. Every blow was fueled by Brianna's delusions of betrayal, by the lies she had convinced herself were true. Selena stood nearby, her phone raised, recording the entire scene. At first, she was shocked by the level of brutality, but she didn't intervene. Whether out of fear or loyalty to Brianna, she continued to film, watching as Lauren begged for mercy. The sight of her once colleague pleading for the beating to stop did nothing to calm Brianna. In fact, it seemed to spur her on, each punch landing harder than the last. Lauren's cries echoed through the small apartment, but no help came. The attack was relentless, and as Lauren tried to shield herself from the blows, Brianna focused on her head and back, where the damage would be most severe. Bruised and bleeding, Lauren collapsed to the floor, unable to fight back. By the time Brianna finally stopped, Lauren was barely conscious. Selena turned off her camera, the grim evidence of the assault saved on her phone. They left Lauren there, broken and beaten, her body trembling from the pain. It wasn't until later that Lauren was found and rushed to the hospital, where doctors tried desperately to save her. But the injuries were too severe. Lauren Rodriguez died shortly after, the result of multiple traumas, including a brain hemorrhage and internal bleeding. The murder shocked the town, but even more horrifying was the fact that the entire attack had been caught on camera. Police quickly launched an investigation, and it wasn't long before Breonna Taylor and Selena Martinez were arrested. Both were charged with robbery and murder, the chilling video evidence sealing their fate. But behind the arrest and trial loomed the question of why. What had driven these women to such violence? And how had a simple grudge over a man spiraled into the brutal murder of an innocent mother? The investigation would reveal the deep-rooted jealousy and manipulation that had festered for months, leading to one of the most shocking crimes the town had ever seen. As investigators delved deeper into the lives of the three individuals involved, they uncovered the layers of jealousy, obsession, and manipulation that had culminated in Lauren Rodriguez's brutal death. Breonna Taylor's anger toward Lauren hadn't appeared overnight, it had been slowly festering for months. When Breonna had first started dating Mark Martinez, she believed their relationship was serious. She had invested emotionally in him, and though the relationship ended, she had never fully let go of her feelings. Mark, however, had moved on quietly and discreetly. In the months after their breakup, he began spending more time with Lauren. Their relationship, while not formalized, was a source of gossip within their social circles, sparking rumors that only added fuel to Breonna's fire. The whispers about Lauren's involvement with Mark, whether true or not, were enough to ignite a dangerous level of jealousy in Breonna. Lauren had no intention of causing harm. She had kept her connection with Mark largely private, especially given her complicated life as a single mother. She was cautious, knowing full well the potential for drama with Breonna, a woman known for her volatile temper. But despite her best efforts to avoid conflict, Lauren found herself dragged into Breonna's world of suspicion and resentment. Breonna's rage was not just about Lauren's relationship with Mark, it was about a loss of control. In her mind, Lauren had stolen something from her, not just Mark's affection, but her sense of power over her own life. The feeling of betrayal, compounded by her insecurities and unchecked emotions, festered until it became something far darker and more destructive. Selena Martinez, on the other hand, was caught in the middle. At just 17, she had been influenced by Breonna in ways she didn't fully comprehend. Breonna had treated Selena like a little sister, taking her under her wing and offering guidance. When Breonna started speaking bitterly about Lauren, Selena felt obligated to take her side. To Selena, Breonna's anger seemed justified, and in her youthful naivety, she believed that by helping Breonna expose Lauren, she was doing the right thing. But as the investigation progressed, it became clear that Selena's involvement went beyond simple loyalty. She had stolen Lauren's phone, filmed the brutal attack, and stood by as Lauren was beaten, her inaction a silent endorsement of the violence. The camera footage, reviewed by investigators, painted a harrowing picture of what had unfolded that day. Selena's role, while passive compared to Breonna's, was no less significant in the eyes of the law. As the community absorbed the shock of Lauren's death, the local police worked tirelessly to piece together the events leading up to the attack. Interviews with friends, family, and co-workers painted a portrait of two women, Breonna and Lauren, whose paths had tragically collided. The story of jealousy, betrayal, and vengeance was one that no one in the town had anticipated. And yet, in hindsight, the signs had been there all along. Mark Martinez, too, was drawn into the spotlight. The quiet, unassuming man who had unwittingly been the catalyst for the crime was left to grapple with the devastation. His connection to both Lauren and Breonna placed him at the center of a storm that he had never intended to create. Public sympathy turned toward him and Lauren's three young sons, who were now left without a mother. For Mark, the weight of guilt was crushing, even though he had no direct involvement in the tragedy. While the community mourned Lauren's loss, Breonna and Selena sat behind bars, awaiting trial. The evidence against them was overwhelming. In addition to the video footage, Breonna had confessed during police interrogations, providing chilling details of how she had lured Lauren to the apartment, pretending to be Selena. Breonna admitted that she had intended to confront Lauren, but once the confrontation began, she lost control. Her confession, though damning, left many wondering whether Breonna truly grasped the gravity of what she had done, or if she saw herself as a victim of circumstance, driven to violence by forces outside her control. Selena's confession was less emotional but equally incriminating. She confirmed that Lauren had been her brother's lover, a fact that she claimed justified her involvement in the plan. However, her youthful naivety was no excuse for the role she played. By recording the attack instead of intervening, she had crossed a line that would haunt her for the rest of her life. As the trial date approached, the prosecution began to build its case. The charges of robbery and murder were severe, and the courtroom would soon become a battleground for determining the extent of Brianna's and Selena's culpability. The video footage, raw and unaided, would serve as the centerpiece of the prosecution's argument, a damning visual record of Lauren's final moments, captured by Selena's unsteady hand. The trial was set to be one of the most highly publicized events in the town's history. Media outlets from surrounding areas descended upon the courthouse, eager to cover the sensational case of betrayal, jealousy, and murder. Brianna Taylor, in her first public appearance since her arrest, was a stark contrast to the confident and fiery woman she had once been. Shackled and dressed in the standard orange jumpsuit, she appeared withdrawn, her expression blank as she entered the courtroom. Selena Martinez, equally subdued, sat beside Brianna. The wide-eyed teenager who had once admired Brianna now seemed lost, caught in the gravity of the situation she had helped create. Their defense attorneys wasted no time trying to paint the women in a more sympathetic light. Brianna, they argued, had acted out of intense emotional distress. She had been manipulated by her own feelings of abandonment and betrayal, and the attack on Lauren was a momentary lapse in judgment, a consequence of psychological turmoil rather than cold-blooded malice. Selena's defense centered on her youth and inexperience. She had been under Brianna's influence, a pawn in an older woman's revenge scheme. Her lawyer argued that while Selena's actions were undeniably wrong, she had not fully understood the consequences of her involvement. She had been coerced, pressured into assisting Brianna, and was now remorseful for the role she had played. But the prosecution's case was powerful. The video footage shown in court for the first time stunned the courtroom. The brutal nature of the attack, Lauren's desperate pleas for mercy, and Selena's quiet complicity as she recorded the assault left little room for doubt. This was not a crime of passion, it was a calculated, brutal attack that had left a mother of 3 dead. As the trial unfolded, witnesses took the stand to testify about the strained relationship between Lauren and Brianna. Co-workers spoke of Brianna's growing jealousy and her obsession with Mark. Friends described how Brianna's anger had boiled over in the weeks leading up to the attack, with some even expressing concerns that it might lead to violence. Yet none had predicted the horrific outcome that had unfolded. The court proceedings were a painful reminder of the senselessness of the crime, and as the trial neared its conclusion, both the prosecution and defense prepared for closing arguments, knowing that the jury's decision would determine the fate of 2 lives forever marked by that fateful day. The courtroom sat in tense silence as both the defense and prosecution prepared their closing arguments. For weeks, the jury had listened to the evidence, the chilling video, the confessions, and the testimony of witnesses. Now it was time for each side to make their final case. The prosecution began, painting a stark and horrific picture of the events that had led to Lauren Rodriguez's death. They focused on the premeditated nature of the attack, emphasizing that Brianna Taylor had lured Lauren to the apartment under false pretenses. The stolen phone, the messages from Selena's number, and Brianna's calculated rage all pointed to an intent not just to humiliate but to destroy. This was not a crime of passion, the prosecutor said, pacing in front of the jury. So this was a deliberate, violent act. Lauren Rodriguez was beaten to death in a premeditated attack fueled by jealousy and revenge. Turning to Selena Martinez, the prosecution did not spare the teenager from accountability. They argued that while Selena may have been influenced by Brianna, she was not a passive participant. By filming the attack, she had become complicit in Lauren's murder. Her inaction, the prosecutor claimed, was as damning as Brianna's violence. This video, the prosecutor said, holding up a still from the footage, is Selena's signature on the crime. The jury watched, visibly shaken, as the prosecutor concluded, reminding them of the real victims in the case, Lauren's 3 young boys, who would grow up without their mother. The emotional weight of the prosecution's final words left the courtroom heavy with the reality of the tragedy. When it was the defense's turn, Brianna's lawyer rose with a different approach. He acknowledged that what had happened was a tragedy, but he pushed the narrative that Brianna had been consumed by emotional turmoil, claiming that her actions stemmed from a profound psychological break. Brianna Taylor is not a monster, he began, his voice measured. She's a woman who was overcome by feelings of abandonment, rejection, and betrayal. Yes, she lashed out, but it was in the heat of emotional distress, not cold-blooded murder. He implored the jury to consider Brianna's background a life filled with instability, failed relationships, and emotional wounds that had led her to this breaking point. "We are not asking you to excuse what happened," he said, looking each juror in the eye. "We are asking you to understand it." For Selena, her lawyer leaned heavily on her youth and vulnerability. Selena, he argued, had been swept up in Brianna's manipulation. At 17, Selena Martinez was still a child in many ways, her lawyer began. She was under the influence of an older woman she trusted, a woman who took advantage of her loyalty and naivety. He argued that Selena did not fully comprehend the seriousness of the situation until it was too late, and that her involvement, while regrettable, was not born from malice. As both sides rested, the judge gave the jury their instructions. It was now up to them to decide whether Brianna and Selena were guilty of murder or a lesser charge like manslaughter. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the jury filed out to begin deliberations. Hours passed, each minute dragging on as the families of Lauren, Brianna, and Selena sat in the gallery, waiting for the decision that would change their lives. Finally, the jury returned. The four persons stood, and the room held its breath as the verdicts were read. For Brianna Taylor, the jury found her guilty of second-degree murder. The intent to kill was evident, they said, but they believed her actions had been influenced by overwhelming emotional distress. It was a small mercy for Brianna, but one that would still carry a lengthy prison sentence. Selena Martinez, however, was convicted of a lesser charge, accessory to murder. The jury, swayed by her youth and the argument that she had been manipulated by Brianna, decided she had not fully understood the gravity of the crime she was involved in. None the crime would still lead to significant time in a juvenile detention facility, followed by potential prison time once she turned 18. As the verdicts were read, the families of the accused remained stone-faced, knowing that while justice had been served, no outcome could undo the damage done. Brianna broke down in tears, her tough exterior shattered by the reality that she would spend much of her life behind bars. Selena, too, wept quietly, realizing for the first time just how deeply her actions had impacted the lives around her. Lauren's family, seated just a few rows away, sat in quiet grief. Her 3 sons, too young to fully comprehend where happened, were being cared for by their grandparents. Mark Martinez, who had been in court every day, watched the verdict with hollow eyes, his face etched with sorrow. Though Brianna and Selena would face justice, it did little to ease the pain of losing Lauren. In the days that followed the trial, the small suburban town where the crime had taken place continued to reel from the shock. This was a community where most people knew each other, where news traveled quickly and secrets were hard to keep. Lauren Rodriguez's murder had shattered the town's sense of safety, and the brutality of the crime weighed heavily on everyone. So the case dominated local headlines for weeks. In coffee shops, at church gatherings, and around dinner tables, people discussed the tragedy in hushed tones. Many had known Lauren as the hard-working mother who would do anything for her children. Her death left behind a painful void, one that resonated deeply in a town not accustomed to violent crime. Mark Martinez, at the center of the scandal, withdrew from public life. His guilt and grief were palpable to those who knew him. He visited Lauren's grave often, a silent reminder of the role his relationships had played in her death. Some in the community pitied him, while others quietly wondered if he had unknowingly set the events in motion by becoming involved with both women. But no matter what anyone thought, Mark was now left with the responsibility of raising his son while dealing with the emotional aftermath of the tragedy. For Lauren's children, the loss was immeasurable. Too young to understand the complexities of their mother's death, they only knew that she was gone, and that life as they had known it would never be the same. Her parents took over custody of the boys, doing their best to shield them from the constant news coverage and the painful reality of their mother's brutal murder. As for Brianna and Selena, their lives were forever altered by the crime. Brianna was sentenced to 25 years in prison, a term that would likely see her spend most of her adult life behind bars. She had been driven by jealousy, but the price she would pay for her actions was steep. In prison, Brianna would have years to reflect on her choices, on how a moment of uncontrollable rage had not only taken a life but ruined her own as well. Selena's sentence, though less severe, was still life-changing. She would serve time in juvenile detention until she turned 18, after which her future would be uncertain. Her involvement in the crime would follow her for the rest of her life, a permanent stain on what could have been a promising future. At just 17, Selena had been lured into a situation she couldn't control, but that didn't absolve her from the consequences of her actions. As the trial concluded and Breonna Taylor and Selena Martinez began serving their sentences, the small town struggled to move on from the shadow of Lauren Rodriguez's murder. The legal process had given some closure, but the emotional wounds were far from healed. In the months that followed the verdict, the community remained haunted by the sheer brutality of the crime, which seemed to defy their perception of the people involved. Lauren's family tried to pick up the pieces. Her parents, now guardians of her 3 sons, worked tirelessly to provide the boys with a semblance of normalcy. The weight of their daughter's absence was ever present, a hollow space in their home that could never be filled. Lauren had been their pride and joy, a devoted mother who had worked hard to give her children a better life. Now they found themselves grappling with the reality that those boys would grow up without her. In their quiet moments, Lauren's parents often thought about the last months of her life, the unspoken worries she might have carried, the tensions she never fully shared. They wondered if they could have done more to protect her, though they knew, deep down, that the cruelty she faced was beyond anything they could have predicted. Mark Martinez remained a figure of sadness in the town. Though never implicated in the crime, his connection to both Lauren and Breonna left him in an impossible position. He continued to raise his son, but the guilt weighed heavily on him. Every time he looked at his child, he was reminded of the love triangle that had ended so tragically. He withdrew from friends and family, the weight of his sorrow too much to share, retreating into the isolation of his own grief. The town, meanwhile, slowly began to heal, though it would never forget. The case of Lauren Rodriguez became a kind of cautionary tale, whispered among friends and used as a grim reminder of how jealousy and unchecked emotions could lead to devastation. People spoke of Breonna Taylor not as the vibrant young woman they had once known, but as the personification of rage, whose violent actions had forever changed the lives of so many. For Breonna Taylor, life in prison was an existence of reflection and regret. The violent fury that had once consumed her had now been replaced by a cold, gnawing emptiness. She had acted in a moment of blind rage, driven by jealousy and heartbreak, and now she had decades to think about the consequences. The prison walls offered no escape from the memories of what she had done, and the faces of Lauren's children motherless because of her haunted her dreams. In prison, Breonna kept to herself, while some inmates reached out to her, curious about her high-profile crime. Breonna avoided any deep connections. She had destroyed one life and shattered several others, and that realization left her with a deep sense of self-loathing. She wrote letters to Lauren's family, letters of apology that were never answered. In her darkest moments, she wondered if forgiveness was even possible, or if she deserved it at all. Selena Martinez, though younger and less directly involved in the violence, also struggled to find peace. In juvenile detention, she worked with counselors who helped her process the events she had participated in. She had been manipulated, yes, but she had also made choices that had contributed to the death of a woman and left 3 children without a mother. As the months turned into years, Selena worked to rebuild her life. She pursued education while in custody, hoping that one day, when her sentence was complete, she could create something positive out of the tragedy she had helped cause. Yet the weight of her actions would always linger in the background, a permanent scar on her soul. Though the immediate shock of the murder faded with time, the town itself took years to fully recover. The once close-knit community was now more cautious, more aware of the fragility of relationships and the dangerous undercurrents that could hide beneath the surface of everyday life. People who had been friends with Breonna struggled with guilt, wondering if they had missed signs of her unraveling. Those who had known Lauren carried the sorrow of her absence, especially when they saw her children in the local park or at school events. Her boys, now growing up without their mother, became symbols of the town's shared grief, their lives forever altered by the actions of 2 women consumed by jealousy and rage. Mark's quiet withdrawal became a reminder that tragedies like this didn't just affect the immediate victims but rippled through everyone connected to the crime. Friends gave him space, unsure of how to comfort him, while he focused on raising his son in the shadow of loss. The town eventually returned to its routines, but the memory of Lauren Rodriguez's death lingered a scar on the landscape of the town's collective memory. It became a story that mothers told their children, a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting emotions like jealousy and anger go unchecked. Years later, the story of Lauren Rodriguez's murder remains a dark chapter in the town's history. The tragic chain of events that led to her death, a mixture of personal insecurities, misplaced anger, and unchecked emotion, serves as a reminder of the complexities of human relationships and the terrible consequences that can arise when they spiral out of control.